My father was a man carved from granite and fueled by a bottomless well of resentment. He had money, quite a lot of it, accumulated through ruthless business dealings and an almost pathological aversion to spending, and he used it as a weapon, a leash, a gilded cage for anyone unfortunate enough to be in his orbit. My siblings, 3 of them, had learned this bitter lesson over the years, one by one. First, my eldest brother, David, for daring to pursue a career in art rather than finance. Then my sister, Eleanor, for marrying a man my father deemed unworthy. And finally, my younger brother, Mark, for simply existing with too much cheer, too little ambition in my father's eyes. Each disinheritance was a public spectacle, a brutal severing of financial ties that left them scrambling and bitter, forever branded as failures in his eyes. I, Arthur, was the last one left. Not because I was better, but because I was quieter, more adaptable, and perhaps more desperate for his approval. For years I had walked a tightrope, balancing his impossible demands with my own flickering sense of self. Then, the inevitable happened. He got sick. A slow, insidious decline that withered his body but left his mind, sharp and cruel, largely intact. It was a nightmare, and I was the sole attendant. While David, Eleanor, and Mark kept their distance, nursing old wounds and new grievances, I stepped into the role of caregiver. I bathed him, my own skin crawling with discomfort as I washed a man who had never shown me tenderness. I fed him, spoon by spoonful, pureed meals that tasted like ash in my mouth. I sat for hours, listening to his rambling dictates, his scathing critiques of the world, and most painfully, his recitations of my siblings' perceived failures, as if to remind me of my precarious position. There were moments, though, rare and fleeting, when the granite seemed to crack. In the dead of night, when the pain was bad, or the fear of death loomed, he would grasp my hand, his grip surprisingly strong, his eyes, usually hard and discerning, softened by vulnerability. He would shed tears, silent, bitter tears, and whisper, "Arthur, you're the only one. The only one who cares. You will inherit everything." Those words became my mantra, my anchor in the storm of his illness. They justified the humiliation, the exhaustion, the quiet erosion of my own life. They painted a future where my sacrifices were not in vain, where I would finally be free, not just of his control, but of the crushing weight of debt and the constant struggle I'd known since childhood. I endured, clinging to that promise like a dying man to a life raft. His death was not a release, but a new kind of prison. The funeral was a somber affair, a quiet gathering of distant relatives and business associates, overshadowed by the oppressive weight of my grief and the unspoken tension that hummed in the air. I stood by the graveside, head bowed, feeling the chill of the earth and the emptiness in my own heart. I hadn't loved him in the traditional sense, but I had served him, and in that service, a twisted, dependent bond had formed. Then they arrived. 3 sleek, black cars pulled up to the cemetery gates, incongruous in the solemn landscape. David, Eleanor, and Mark stepped out, not with grief etched on their faces, but with an unsettling air of business-like determination. They weren't alone. 2 sharp-suited lawyers trailed behind them like vultures. My blood ran cold. The confrontation came swiftly, brutally, before the mourners had even dispersed. We were still there, by the fresh earth, when the lawyers approached me, documents in hand. My siblings flanked them, their expressions ranging from smug satisfaction, Mark, to cold defiance, Eleanor, to a curious mix of triumph and unease, David. "Arthur," the lead lawyer announced, his voice devoid of sympathy. "We regret to inform you, your father passed without a valid will." The words hit me like a physical blow. No will? It was impossible. He had promised me. He had told me. My mind reeled, the past 4 years of servitude flashing before my eyes, suddenly rendered meaningless. Before I could articulate my shock, the lawyer continued. "However, during our recent discussions with your father, he expressed a change of heart regarding his estate. He wished to ensure all his children were provided for, equally." My gaze snapped to my siblings. Eleanor met my eyes with a challenging stare. David looked away, shifting his weight. Mark, though, was practically radiating smugness. "They claimed my father had told them he'd changed his mind," I later recounted, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. They produced a document. It was a single sheet of paper, folded crisply, now unfolded and presented to me. On it, a handwritten note, supposedly in my father's familiar, elegant script, stating a clear intention to divide his entire estate equally among his 4 children. It was dated merely a week before his death. I stared at it, my mind racing. A week before his death, he could barely hold a spoon, let alone write something so coherent. My father, the man who had disinherited them with such relish, who had railed against their perceived failures even from his deathbed, had suddenly, inexplicably, decided to embrace them? It reeked of fabrication. Mark stepped forward, a cruel smile twisting his lips. He leaned in, his voice a low, taunting whisper meant only for me. "Sorry, brother. Dad always knew you were weak. You get nothing." The words resonated with the chill of the grave itself. Weak. After everything I had done, the endless nights, the selfless care, the sacrifices that had bled my own life dry, I was branded weak. I felt a hot flush of shame and fury spread through me, battling with the icy grip of despair. The ground seemed to tilt beneath my feet. I had been humiliated, betrayed, not just by my siblings, but by the ghost of my father himself, or so it seemed. They had won. They had undone everything, turned my devotion into a fool's errand. But even as the bitter taste of defeat filled my mouth, a flicker of something else ignited within me. A stubborn, defiant ember of suspicion. I knew that document was fake. I knew it with the certainty of someone who had watched every stroke of his pen for decades. My father's handwriting was distinctive, yes, elegant and precise, but it bore a crucial, unforgettable flaw. After a minor stroke years ago, he'd developed a slight tremor in his left hand. It wasn't pronounced, but it was there, a subtle, upward slant to the end of his letters, especially the T's and L's, a microscopic wobble that only someone intimately familiar with his writing would ever notice. This note, this supposed deathbed declaration, was too even, too clean, too perfect. It lacked the telltale tremor. They thought they were clever. They thought they had fooled me. But they hadn't counted on the depth of my intimacy with my father during his final years. He might have been a monster, but in his vulnerability, stripped bare by illness, he had confided in me. He had told me things he'd never told anyone else, not his lawyers, not his business partners, certainly not my estranged siblings. He had spoken of his regrets, his fear of being truly alone, his contempt for the avarice he saw in others, even, or perhaps especially, in his own children. And he had told me about the safety deposit box. It wasn't a grand revelation, not a dramatic scene. It was a murmur, late one night, after a particularly bad spell of pain, when he was lucid but weakened. He looked at me, his eyes holding a strange, knowing glint, and said, "There's a key, Arthur. In the false bottom of my old humidor. It's for the box at the First National. You're the only one. Remember that." Then he drifted off, leaving me to ponder the meaning of his words. I had found the small, tarnished brass key weeks ago, tucked away just as he described, but I hadn't acted on it. Now it burned a hole in my pocket. The morning after the funeral, while my siblings were undoubtedly already celebrating their victory and planning the division of the spoils, I went to the bank. My heart hammered against my ribs, a dull, anxious thud. Was this a wild goose chase? Another one of his cruel games? A final, posthumous joke at my expense? The teller, accustomed to my father's visits, greeted me politely. Showing the key and proof of my relationship, I was led to a small, private viewing room. The heavy steel door of the vault clanged shut behind me, isolating me in a world of silent anticipation. My hands trembled as I inserted the key, carefully turning it until I heard the satisfying click. Inside, nestled amongst a few yellow documents and a small velvet pouch of antique coins, lay a thick, legal-sized envelope. My name was scrawled across it in my father's distinctive hand, not the perfect, phony script of the note, but the one I knew intimately, the one with the slight, upward slant at the end of the letters. The tremor was there. My fingers fumbled as I tore it open. Inside, an original will. Notarized. Witnessed by his longtime lawyer and a junior partner, both now deceased. Dated 5 years ago, long before his illness took hold. It was pristine, legally binding, and unambiguous. It left everything to me. A wave of dizzying relief, mixed with a fierce, cold resolve, washed over me. He hadn't betrayed me. He had tested me. And I had passed. The probate hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. My siblings, confident in their forged document and the absence of any other will, arrived radiating an aura of smug ownership. Mark was already talking about converting the old library into a home cinema. Eleanor was discussing interior decorators for the main house. David, ever the more hesitant of the three, looked subtly uncomfortable, but he stood by them, a silent accomplice. I walked into the courtroom, my spine straight, my face a mask of calm determination. I carried a worn leather briefcase, inside which lay the future. The siblings, seated at the opposing table with their lawyers, barely glanced at me. They saw a defeated man, a weak man, just as Mark had so cruelly asserted. The proceedings began, a dry explanation of intestacy laws, the presentation of their handwritten note, as evidence of my father's dying wishes. My siblings watched me, their eyes gleaming with a triumphant malice. Mark even offered a patronizing, fake sad smile. They were ready to watch me crumble. "Mr. Finch," the judge said, turning to me, his voice neutral, "do you have anything to present beyond your claim of familial care?" I rose slowly, deliberately. The room seemed to hold its breath. I placed the leather briefcase on the table before me, unclipped it, and withdrew the aged, heavy document. "Yes, Your Honor," I said, my voice clear and steady, betraying none of the earthquake raging inside me. "I do." I handed the will to the court clerk, who passed it to the judge. As he began to read, a hush fell over the courtroom. My siblings, at first, merely exchanged puzzled glances. Then, as the judge's expression slowly shifted, as the name, Arthur Finch, was read aloud again and again, their faces began to drain of color. My brother Mark, who minutes earlier had been so brimming with confidence, stammered, "That's not possible." His voice was hoarse with disbelief, his eyes wide with dawning horror. Eleanor's jaw dropped, her carefully composed facade crumbling into slack-jawed shock. David, ever the most sensitive, simply looked like he'd seen a ghost, his hand covering his mouth. I looked at Mark, holding his gaze, the weight of years of silent resentment, of his callous words at the grave, finally finding its outlet. My voice was low, but it carried in the silent courtroom, each word a hammer blow. "Dad told me everything. He knew you were all greedy. This is what he wanted." The judge looked up, his expression now one of absolute certainty. "This document is an original, legally executed will, properly notarized and witnessed. It predates the alleged handwritten note by several years and is therefore the last valid expression of the deceased's wishes." He paused, his gaze sweeping over my pale, stunned siblings. "The estate of Charles Finch, therefore, passes entirely to his son, Arthur Finch, as per this will." A gavel struck, sharp and decisive. My siblings were speechless, paralyzed by the sudden, brutal reversal of fortune. They watched, helpless, as the judge's order was swiftly carried out. Security was called. They were removed from the property, their keys confiscated, their access revoked. Their lawyers, bewildered and deflated, could do nothing but pack their briefcases and follow. The silence they left behind was deafening, but it was a silence of peace, of justice. The subsequent months were a whirlwind of legalities and practicalities. I sold the estate. The sprawling, imposing mansion, a monument to my father's oppressive wealth, was too steeped in painful memories to keep. The land, the investments, the art collection, I liquidated it all. I kept what was mine, enough to live comfortably, to finally be free of the financial anxieties that had always shadowed me. And the rest? The immense surplus that would have fueled my siblings' lavish lifestyles and endless lawsuits? I donated it. Every last cent, after taxes, went to a charity for elderly veterans, a cause I knew my father, despite his flaws, quietly respected. It was a final, fitting act, a testament to true value beyond possessiveness, and a stark contrast to the greed that had consumed my siblings. They sued, of course. A desperate, enraged attempt to reclaim what they felt was theirs. They alleged undue influence, fraud, anything they could contrive. But the case was dismissed. The original, legally binding will, combined with the obvious forgery of their note, a fact my lawyers delighted in exposing, left no room for doubt. They were left with nothing, not even the meager share they tried to steal. I haven't spoken to any of them since. I don't know where they are, what they do. Our paths diverged irrevocably that day in the courtroom. There's no bitterness, just a quiet acceptance. I live modestly now, in a small, comfortable house near the coast. The ocean breeze carries the scent of salt and freedom. There are no grand estates, no servants, no endless obligations. Just the quiet hum of a life truly my own. Once a year, on the anniversary of his death, I visit my father's grave. The granite headstone stands stoic, just like the man it commemorates. I don't bring flowers. He never cared for them. I simply stand there, for a long while, looking at his name carved into the stone. "Thank you, Father," I whisper, the words a complex tapestry of gratitude for the freedom he ultimately provided, and forgiveness for the pain he inflicted. "I made you proud." Perhaps, in his own twisted way, he had always wanted me to be strong. Strong enough to break free. strong enough to choose my own path. And in the end, by leaving everything to me, he had given me the ultimate power to do just that. The weight of his control was finally lifted, replaced by the quiet dignity of a life well lived, on my own terms.